Where Captain Kirk's second Starship Enterprise came from in the Star Trek movies, Captain James T. Kirk William Shatner took command of the USS Enterprise A at the end of the fourth Star Trek movie, but Starfleet didn't have another Starship Enterprise just lying around. Captain Kirk is synonymous with the USS Enterprise. Jim became one of the youngest Starship captains in history when he became captain of the Enterprise in 2265. Kirk led the Enterprise on a historic 5-year mission in Star Trek, the original series, Star Trek, the animated series, and in the first 3 Star Trek movies. Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home was a unique Star Trek movie where the USS Enterprise doesn't appear until the very end, and it was a new starship bearing that name. In director Leonard Nimoy's Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, Admiral Kirk self-destructed the original Starship Enterprise to keep it from falling into Klingon hands. Kirk committed several crimes in Star Trek III to rescue Spock Leonard Nimoy from the Genesis planet, including hijacking the Enterprise before he blew it up. Admiral Kirk further disobeyed Starfleet's orders in Star Trek IV and led a stolen Klingon bird of prey named the HMS Valley back to 1986 San Francisco to retrieve 2 humpback whales. Kirk's gambit saved Earth from destruction by the whale probe, which the Federation Council took into account when they demoted Admiral Kirk back to captain. Kirk's reward was his heart's desire, once again becoming captain of the Enterprise, and Jim was given the brand new USS Enterprise A. Captain Kirk and his crew didn't know until they saw it that Starfleet had assigned them the brand new USS Enterprise NCC 1701A. The Constitution II class starship was almost identical to the USS Enterprise refit that Kirk commanded in the first 3 Star Trek movies. Although the Enterprise A was already in Space Dock 1, it wasn't a previously used starship that was rechristened Enterprise. USS Enterprise A was actually a newly commissioned vessel. USS Enterprise A was built at the San Francisco Fleet Yards, and it was commissioned by the Federation Council specifically for Captain Kirk to replace the destroyed USS Enterprise. Although Enterprise A was a new ship, it came with a slew of problems that were quickly discovered by Chief Engineer Montgomery Scott James Doohan. Enterprise A's shakedown cruise revealed a working warp drive but several malfunctioning systems, including inoperable transporters. When fans of Star Trek think of Captain James T. Kirk, they almost universally picture him standing boldly on the bridge of the USS Enterprise. But what many casual viewers don't always realize is that Kirk didn't serve aboard just one version of the famed starship. After the destruction of the original USS Enterprise NCC 1701, Kirk eventually took command of a second vessel, Enterprise A. But where exactly did this second Enterprise come from, and why did Starfleet bestow it upon Kirk and his crew? The answer is layered in Starfleet politics, behind-the-scenes production decisions, and in universe lore that helps stitch together a major transition in the Star Trek films. The destruction of the original Enterprise. The original USS Enterprise met a tragic, though heroic, end in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Following Spock's death in the Wrath of Khan, Kirk disobeys orders to rescue Spock's body and soul from the Genesis planet. That mission results in the confrontation with Klingon forces and ultimately the destruction of the Enterprise. In a desperate tactic, Kirk activates the ship's self-destruct sequence to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. The ship that had served as the primary setting for much of the original series and the first 2 films goes out in a blaze of glory, literally and thematically. This loss hit hard, not just for Kirk, but for the entire fanbase. The Enterprise wasn't just a ship, it was a character, a home, and a symbol of the Federation's exploratory spirit. Its destruction left a narrative and emotional void that needed to be filled. The surprise gift in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. At the end of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, after the crew saves Earth by communicating with the alien whale probe Yes, the one demanding to hear from humpback whales, they return to Earth to face punishment for their earlier defiance of Starfleet orders. However, given their heroic actions in saving the planet, the charges are mostly dropped. Kirk is demoted from admiral to captain, ironically a position he prefers, and then the crew is escorted to a new ship waiting for them in space dock. That's when the reveal happens. The doors open to show the gleaming new USS Enterprise A. It's a cinematic moment of rebirth and redemption, both for Kirk and for the audience. But where did this ship come from? Was it built from scratch? Refit from another ship? Retrofitted for symbolic purposes? The film never says directly, leaving it up to fan theories and extended universe material to fill in the gaps. Enterprise A mystery, reassignment, or refit? In universe, Starfleet doesn't often recycle ship names immediately, especially those of major legacy vessels. Naming another ship Enterprise so quickly after the destruction of NCC 1701 was unusual, suggesting that the gesture was more symbolic than practical. The crew had not only redeemed themselves, but also reminded the Federation what exploration and self-sacrifice were all about. The prevailing fan theory, and one supported by multiple tie-in novels and technical manuals, is that the Enterprise A was not a newly built vessel, but a rechristened ship. Some sources claim it was originally the USS Yorktown, a Constitution-class vessel undergoing a refit or waiting for reassignment. Rather than construct a new ship from scratch, Starfleet is believed to have simply renamed the Yorktown to Enterprise A and refit it with updated systems. This would explain some of the apparent issues seen in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, where the Enterprise A is plagued with malfunctions. Everything from the turbolifts to the food replicators is misbehaving. It's as if the ship wasn't quite ready to be out in the field, lending support to the theory that the reassignment was somewhat rushed for symbolic reasons. Production perspective, why another Enterprise? From a production standpoint, the destruction of the Enterprise in Star Trek III was a bold choice. It raised the stakes and gave Kirk one of his most emotionally wrenching scenes. However, the Enterprise was too iconic to be absent from the franchise for long. Audiences expected a ship called Enterprise as part of the Star Trek experience, and the studio knew this. Thus, the Enterprise A was introduced at the end of Star Trek IV as a crowning moment to restore normalcy to the franchise. It allowed for future films to maintain the established aesthetic and setting, while still giving the story a feeling of evolution. The new ship represented a fresh start, not just for the crew, but for the future of Star Trek itself. The ship's design and legacy. Visually, the Enterprise looks nearly identical to the refitted version of the original Enterprise introduced in Star Trek, the motion picture. The model was reused with only minor updates. Behind the scenes, this made perfect sense. Why rebuild a new model when the old one was still usable? In universe, the Enterprise A was also a Constitution-class starship, suggesting that Starfleet favored tried and true engineering during this period. However, the ship clearly had some teething problems, as shown in Star Trek V. These problems were mostly played for humor, but they also fit the narrative that this vessel was perhaps not originally intended to bear the legendary name. By the time of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, the Enterprise A had become a competent, fully operational ship. It was once again front and center in a galactic crisis, the peace negotiations with the Klingons following the explosion of Praxis. The crew took the ship on one last mission before its retirement. The decommissioning of Enterprise A. At the end of Star Trek VI, the Enterprise A is ordered decommissioned. The move,